There's a table somewhere in America this year that's going to be set for 6, even though only 4 people are coming. A mother will catch herself doing it, pulling out one extra plate, one extra chair, before she remembers again that he's not coming this year. Maybe he hasn't come in 3 years. Maybe it's his first Thanksgiving away. Either way, she'll set the table for the family she has, and somewhere in the back of her mind, she'll still be setting it for the family she remembers. My name is Margaret. I'm a mother and a grandmother, and if there is one season that brings this particular kind of grief into sharpest focus, it's this one. Not because anything new happens, but because the holidays were never just about food or gifts. They were always about gathering, about the one guaranteed moment each year when everyone you raised sits at the same table. And when that moment goes missing, it doesn't just hurt in November and December, it becomes the marker by which you measure the whole year's loss. If you're approaching a holiday season with an empty chair at your table, I want you to know something before we go any further. You are far from alone, and there's a reason this particular kind of absence cuts so much deeper than an ordinary missed phone call. We'll get into exactly why. But first, let's talk honestly about what these holidays have become for so many American families. According to research from Cornell sociologist Dr. Carl Pillemer, roughly 27% of American adults report being estranged from a family member, and holidays are consistently identified as the single hardest point in the calendar for these families. Not because the conflict gets worse in November, because the holidays were built culturally around the assumption of full attendance. Thanksgiving itself is staged almost entirely around a table. Christmas is staged around a tree with everyone gathered beneath it. These are rituals that only work as advertised when everyone shows up. So when someone doesn't, the ritual itself becomes the wound. You're not just missing your son or your daughter, you're sitting inside a tradition that was explicitly built to showcase the very thing you've lost. Here's what almost no one says out loud about this season, and I think it needs saying. The hardest part of an estranged holiday is rarely the day itself. It's the 4 to 6 weeks leading up to it. Researchers who study anticipatory grief, the grief that happens before a loss rather than after it, have found that the lead up to an anniversary or a ritual date often produces more anxiety and rumination than the date itself. You start seeing it everywhere in October. Commercials with happy multi-generational tables, neighbors posting about hosting 12 people, a co-worker asking casually, innocently, "What are your plans for Thanksgiving?" And each of these ordinary moments becomes a small test you didn't sign up to take. This is real, this is documented, and it is not a sign that you are handling things badly. It is simply what it costs to live inside a culture that built an entire emotional industry around a holiday season that assumes intact families. Now, I want to turn to the other side of this table because I made you a promise on this channel and I intend to keep it. Your son or daughter, who isn't coming this year, is very likely not having an easy holiday season either. Researchers who study estrangement from the adult child's perspective consistently find that holidays are one of the most psychologically loaded times for the estranged child too, often more loaded than for the parent, because the child is the one who has to actively decide year after year whether to attend or not. That decision rarely comes from indifference. In fact, the data tells a more complicated story. A study on family estrangement coping found that the holidays produce some of the highest reported guilt and anxiety levels among adult children who have distanced themselves from a parent. Many of them describe lying awake the week before Thanksgiving, debating whether to text, whether to show up unannounced, whether silence has gone on so long now that breaking it would require an explanation they don't know how to give. The absence at your table is not evidence that he isn't thinking about you. For many estranged adult children, the holidays are the loudest, most uncomfortable reminder of exactly what they've stepped away from. Here's something that surprised even the researchers who study this. A pattern that keeps emerging in interviews with estranged adult children in America is what one study called holiday dread by proxy. The child isn't avoiding the parent specifically. They're avoiding the entire emotional weather system that the holiday recreates. the old dynamics, the old roles, the old version of themselves that shows up the moment they walk through that door. For some adult children, skipping the holiday isn't a statement about you. It's the only tool they have to avoid stepping back into a family system that, for reasons that may have nothing to do with any single bad moment, felt impossible to navigate as themselves. That doesn't make the empty chair hurt less. But it might help to know that the empty chair is rarely a verdict on your worth as a mother. It's often just one person's best available strategy for managing something they don't yet have better tools for. I want to pause here and say something gently. If you've spent the last several holiday seasons trying to fix this through bigger gestures, longer letters, more frequent calls in the weeks before the holiday, invitations that grow more elaborate each year, please hear this with compassion rather than criticism. Researchers who study reconciliation patterns have found that escalating pressure around specific calendar dates tends to increase avoidance rather than decrease it. The holiday becomes for your child not an invitation but a deadline. And deadlines, for someone who is already avoidant, tend to produce more distance, not less. What tends to work better, according to family therapists who specialize in estrangement, is something almost uncomfortably simple. Low pressure, no deadline contact that doesn't hinge on the holiday at all. A message in October that says nothing more than thinking of you with no request attached. A photo from your garden in July. Small, ordinary proof that the door is open every day of the year, not just on the days the culture says it should be. This takes the holiday itself out of the role of being the make or break moment, and it often, over years, makes actual holidays easier to navigate when they do happen. There's another layer to this that researchers studying grandparent estrangement specifically have flagged, and it tends to make the holidays even heavier. When the estranged adult child has their own children, the holiday isn't just about a missing son or daughter anymore. It's about grandchildren growing up in years you don't get to witness, birthdays you hear about secondhand, if at all, a first Christmas morning you'll never see, a voice on the other end of a phone you don't get to recognize when it eventually changes. The American Society on Aging has documented that grandparents who lose contact during these formative years often describe the holiday season as the moment this loss becomes unbearably concrete, because it's the one time of year the whole culture insists on picturing exactly the table you don't have. If this is part of your story, I want you to know that this grief has a name too, even if no one around you is using it. It deserves exactly as much compassion as the loss of your child's calls. Let's talk about what to actually do with the day itself, because that's the part most of you are sitting with right now. Grief counselors who work specifically with ambiguous loss, the kind of loss where the person is alive but absent, recommend something that might sound strange at first. Build a new ritual rather than trying to recreate the old one in a smaller form. Setting the same table, cooking the same recipes, sitting in the same chairs with one obviously empty tends to amplify the absence rather than soften it. Families who report doing better around these holidays often describe deliberately changing something, a different location, a different time of day, a new tradition that didn't exist when everyone was together, so there's nothing for the day to be compared against. This isn't about pretending the loss doesn't exist. It's about giving yourself a holiday that gets to exist on its own terms, instead of one that's permanently measured against a version of the table that no longer exists. Across the United States this season, there are more empty chairs at Thanksgiving tables than most people realize, because this kind of loss doesn't get talked about at the dinner parties where it's happening. Someone will ask how many you're hosting this year, and you'll say a number, and nobody will ask why it's smaller than it used to be. That silence is its own kind of weight. I want you to know that if you're carrying it, you are part of a much larger, much quieter community than you think. And here's what I want to leave you with, because the research on this is more hopeful than the holiday season often feels. Family estrangement researchers who track these relationships over years consistently find that holidays, painful as they are also disproportionately common turning points toward eventual reconciliation. Something about the symbolic weight of these dates, The same weight that makes them so hard to sit through alone also makes them powerful moments for a tentative first text, a small gesture, a door cracked open just slightly after years of silence. Not every year, not on a schedule you can predict, but more often than the ache of this season would have you believe. So if you're setting that table this year and there's a chair that stays empty, let it be okay to feel the full weight of that. You don't have to perform gratitude you don't feel today. But you also don't have to give up on every future holiday because of how this one looks. Maybe this year you send the small, quiet message in January instead of December. Maybe you build one new tradition that's entirely your own. Maybe you simply let yourself sit with the empty chair without needing to explain it to anyone at the table. If this season is hard for you in this particular way, please leave a comment and tell me about it. So many of you have shared these stories with me before, and every single time someone else in the comments says the same 4 words back, me too, every year. You are not alone at that table, even when it feels like you are. And whatever this season brings, the door can stay open long after the dishes are put away.